And so it's meant to be read with a level of sadness that the kingdom isn't like it used to be. It's not the king who's at the top and he's reigning over his people with justice and equity.
Yeah.
The king has faded and he has become...
He's now a puppet of the deep state, right?
Amen. I love it.
Sorry, got into political mode there. Current events.
I really like that one, though.
You're listening to Rhythms of Grace, a podcast of Grace Fellowship Church in McClenny, Florida, with pastors Nathaniel Simmons and Joel Griffiths. You can find out more about Grace Fellowship Church at www.gfcbaker.org.
I always wait for that cutout.
Yeah. I might could have it go a little sooner so we can start talking quicker.
That's all right. It gets me in the easy listening mood here.
Yeah.
So, all right, Saturday we have our work day because we are close. Make
sure and come out to it if you can.
Yeah, we've been working toward getting into this building for a long time. Went through a period where you're like, what is this ever going to happen?
Yeah.
And now
it's really starting to happen.
Right there. It's right around the corner.
Really doing it, aren't we, buddy?
So everybody's going to come, hopefully, on Saturday. They're going to see it. They're going to be part of the work day, so they'll get to make this decision for themselves. But I'm going to a little teaser when they're going to come in and see the building. So far, do you have a favorite aspect of what you've seen as the building's coming together?
I think I really just like going into the sanctuary space and seeing the carpet that's put in now, and it's really nice. Yeah. Seeing the sound area where all our computers and monitors and mixer boards will go, and it's all kind of empty right now, but there's such a sense of like newness and potential that I'm sure it's just going to be great when there's actual bodies in there and people worshiping and singing and fellowshipping. And another little thing I haven't seen yet, so I don't really know what it's going to look like, but I've just heard the idea of the kind of stained glass looking trim that's going to be up on the stage somewhere. I've been hearing about that, and I know Amy's going to do a great job with it because she's just great at that stuff.
She doesn't do anything but a great job.
Yeah, but I'm excited to see that because I like that. I like that homage, I guess, or homage. I never know how to say that if I'm saying it right, but to kind of traditional, church architecture.
Yeah,
that old stained glass look. It'd be cool to have just at least a little hint of that in our building. So
yeah, no, I agree.
I'm excited.
I agree. Like you said, the building when it was a shell, in some ways, like we knew it was going to be a church. We were excited about it, but now it's starting to look like a worship service or sanctuary. I really thought when she framed out the doors, there's these awesome doors that go in there, and then she's framed it out. All of the door framing, and framing is the wrong word, but the trim around all the doors. I like it. I like the style. I like the way it looks. But she did just a little bit extra on the entry into the sanctuary space, and it just feels like you're walking into a sacred space. And it's already there, I think, like you said. You're going to get the shadow boxes in there with the stained glass window. You're going to get seats. You're going to get people in there. The cross, Amy was working on the cross yesterday. When that goes up, I feel like I'm already starting to sense this is going to be a special space, and I'm pretty excited. I'm just excited about it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well,
we were there. We were there yesterday planting some bushes.
That's right.
That was fun.
That was fun.
Doing some back-breaking labor. Not really.
Didn't
take us that long, but we'll do a lot more Saturday. So
I didn't wear gloves, and I had dirt under my fingernails all day long.
Dirt out of my fingernails.
That's all right. All right.
Let's talk about your sermon.
Yeah. People will get to see all of that stuff with their own eyes on Saturday, so they can make their own decisions on that.
Yeah.
Sermon stuff.
Sermon was great. You showed off your piano skills. It was magical. No, it was really good. And that was at the end, though, so we'll wait to talk about it. But it's 2 Samuel chapter 20 was where you were, and I've just got it pulled up here. We see kind of right off the bat from the beginning of the passage, it talks about this guy named Sheba, and you had a dog named Sheba, you mentioned, and you didn't know that he was a bad guy in the Bible.
Yeah, I told Cannon, like, that was a really weird thing. Cannon was pretty sick yesterday, so she took off a little bit early after playing violin. And I said, Cannon, I started talking about my dog Sheba, and then I went into the old Feed Jake, He's Been a Good Dog song, and all of a sudden I'm like, wait, what are we doing here? This is a sermon. It's not country music hour.
Yeah, you should have sung it and played it on piano.
Did you know that song, If I Die Before I Wake, Feed Jake? He's been a good dog.
It seems vaguely familiar. I don't know.
It's like super corny country music. Anyway,
that probably got you into an emotional, mental space, for
I'll tell you this.
The rest of the message.
Cannon said she said, I think Joel was a little bit emotional. Like he was like, let's clap for everybody. There was just a sense of Joel was excited to be there yesterday. The whole thing just felt like a happy energy to the service.
Yeah, and I think I told you afterward that you did make me cry at the end of your message. So
well, I told her that you said that, and I said, but I feel like that you already were just in a good emotional space for that. I could tell the whole way through the way you were leading, just thanking everybody, and a couple extra hand claps of praise from you.
Yep. So
anyway, Sheba was the name of my dog.
Yeah, but he's also the name of this.
You want another little story about Sheba?
Sure.
He was my dog when I was about 7, 8 years old. That was when I had Sheba. I had every weekend for some reason I was getting these migraine headaches. I guess I was 6 or 7, but they were debilitating. So I would spend the whole weekend in the bed, lights off, no sound, no lights, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. They took me in for X-rays, and they were just trying to figure out what was causing these headaches when I was a kid. And so my stuffed animal, I had my dog Sheba, but I also had a stuffed animal dog that I also named Sheba, and I still have somewhere around here an X-ray of a stuffed animal dog Sheba, which just shows you how big of a deal Sheba was to me back then. So, little story. Anyway, none of that's relevant to this.
Well, good. This guy in the story, he is a worthless man, which does not seem like a very nice thing to say. But
that's right.
The Bible's just real about it. Do you want to talk a little bit? Because you mentioned a few different guys that we've already seen who are described the same way. Like this is kind of a common way to denigrate someone, I guess, in the Bible, or describe somebody as worthless. Like, who are some of those people, if you can remember? And then, like, why is it calling them this?
Yeah. Well, I will say right off the bat, you gave this sermon last week about being encouraging and, giving everybody the best, thoughts. And I do think that that's clearly a massive command in the Bible throughout. But I do think it is interesting that there are other times where you see, let's be honest, that people are not always good, and the worthless here. The word worthless is nice to have a Bible software thing that can help you look it up. It's used a bunch of times in the Bible, but in 1 and 2 Samuel, 14 times, which is the majority really of the Old Testament usage, and it's used almost exclusively as an insult, not just like the word worthless, but it's directed toward a person, calling them a worthless man or the son of a worthless man, which is almost sounds like a cuss, right? Like a cursing, you son of a worthless man. The first time it was used, if I remember correctly, it was actually Hannah in her prayer. So remember, she comes to the temple and Eli thinks she's drunk, and she's like, I'm not a worthless woman, or the daughter of a worthless woman. I can't remember how she says it there, but it's like she's saying that's not how I am. And then from then on, it is not somebody saying I'm not this. It's the Bible saying they are this. And it's, so I went through each one of those and looked at them and said, well, what was the time? What makes them worthless? And it all seems to be people who are dishonoring some kind of authority structure. So Hannah would have been the priest in the temple, and she's saying, that's not what I'm doing. But then it is immediately after that, Eli's sons are doing that. They are dishonoring the temple, and they're dishonoring their father who tells them to stop. When Saul becomes king, you have these guys who says, he's not a king for us, we're not going to take him. And so the Bible calls them worthless men. Several people who reject David. Shimei was the last one we saw who rejected David, and he threw stuff at him and cursed David. And the Bible called him a worthless man. Remember, my brain froze. Belial, the son of Belial, or man of Belial, is that common phrase. And it's all these people who are just really haughty, refuse to accept leadership in their lives. Yeah. And it's interesting that the Bible refers to them as worthless people. Mm-hmm. I thought worthless, I guess my mind would have meant like they're lazy people. I think that's how my family would have used, he's worthless, he's lazy. Yeah. But that's that doesn't seem to be the thing. Like Nabal was rich and he had all kind of money. It's not laziness that made them worthless. It's a despising, it's a disrespectfulness and a despising of authority that made them worthless. Yeah.
Good. And you mentioned, I think I meant to start here actually, how this passage connects with what came before it. So Sheba's this guy who was rejecting David's authority. And that really ties in with what happened at the end of the last chapter, chapter 19, because you mentioned the civil war that was going on. I think the way you described it, and I'll just ask a question about this, is that I think you might have said we've got another civil war now. Yeah. And I wonder if maybe the way I would have said it was it's a new episode of the same civil war, really, because this at the end of 19, you have the northern tribes arguing with Judah about bringing David back and who really has the most claim to David, and just an argument about that kind of thing. And then the first verse of 20 says that there happened to be there a worthless man whose name was Sheba. So Sheba's kind of involved in this argument, I guess it would seem to me. Yeah. And so he kind of takes the opportunity to really drum up some anti David efforts and say, we have no portion in David, every man to his tents, O Israel. And so he's a Benjaminite, it says. So that's interesting because Judah and Benjamin were kind of allied as the southern tribes versus the northern tribes of Israel. So did you kind of have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. There's a few things you said. Real quick, I think you're absolutely right that I acted like, hey, two separate civil wars. And there's a sense in which I still believe that. There's two different leaders and there's two different things going. Absalom is not Sheba, and it seems like there's going to be another iteration. But I do think you're right that this is connected out of chapter 19. And I don't know, you preach 19, so I'd be interested to hear what you say. I think that it makes 19, to me, this really hard to fully wrap my head around chapter, because it's clear that David is being super nice and he's working to establish peace, right? So why is he letting all these guys who are bad guys go, right? He's not doing things. It seems that it's because he's like, whatever it takes to make peace, I'm going to do that. He just really wants peace. And it doesn't work, right? At the end of the day, or it kind of works, but it doesn't really work. And I guess it made me ask, did he go for peace in the right? Is this David's fault? Or is it just the reality of the situation that people have spent so much time fighting? Is it some of both? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, real quick, I I took you as saying that the end of 19 and the things I preached on there were a civil war, and now this was a new civil war. But you meant what happened with everything that happened with Absalom was a civil war,
right?
And now this is kind of okay. Like I understand more what you're saying there now, but yeah, I mean, I forget what it was you asked. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just thinking, looking back on David's response, and it's clear that he's trying to make peace here.
Yeah.
But it doesn't fully happen. And how much of that is on the people refusing to obey, and how much of that is on David not securing peace in the right way? And is it both, or is it one or the other? And I don't know.
It reminds me of the Bug's Life quote where the grasshopper says, "First rule of leadership, everything is your fault."
Yeah.
So you could look at it that way, I guess, like everything falls on the leader. But I don't know. I feel torn on that because everybody's a sinner, and everybody has something to contribute to these sort of conflicts that escalate. And so, but there is a sense in which the leader has to take all of that onto himself and say, what can I do to make peace here?
It seems to me that some of the ways he sought to make peace were actually he sacrificed justice to make peace, right? Making Amasa the head of the army, that didn't seem right. I thought the way he treated Mephibosheth, he rewarded Ziba in order to treat Mephibosheth, to make it all, it hurt Mephibosheth and helped Ziba. And I didn't feel like that was just. It wasn't the right thing. Now, the difference, though, is Mephibosheth strikes me as the truly godly person. Like, I don't care. I just love David. And so he didn't harbor bitterness. He didn't seem to be upset. Where it seems like a lot of the other people are like, well, if he doesn't live with us, we're angry or we don't trust him. It seems like Joab, if he doesn't make me general, I'm going to take it on my own. And so I think that there were some things that David did that were the shortcuts to peace, and they didn't work. But that doesn't excuse Joab for what he does. It doesn't excuse Sheba. And we see that there's a guy like Mephibosheth who says, yeah, you know what? David probably didn't do the right thing. But godly Mephibosheth is like, I know he's your favorite guy in the story, and for good reason. He seems to be over and over and over just on another level of humility. And I don't know. I view David's response in 19 as a mixed bag. It was good that he was trying to make peace. I don't think he always did it right, and I think that's part of why there's just this grumbling that's going on, because he just didn't assert himself correctly. Anyway, I don't know if that was too much of a side topic.
No, that's good. But thinking about that idea of leadership, then I think you had some good points of application there in helping us think about the fact that leadership is part of life, and in multiple areas of life there has to be leadership, and it's leadership that God has ordained, whether we're talking about in the home and among families, or in churches, or in government. And that's one that is kind of hard for you mentioned, like, red-blooded Americans who tend to have a small government kind of mindset, who are suspicious of government often and believe they're all crooked. And exactly. And so, but you brought us to Romans 13, where Paul talks about submitting to the governing authorities, and that there's no authority that is not appointed by God in that way. And so submission to the governing authorities is actually submission to God, which is a good word, something that we need to hear. And I even thought about it, by the way. Tonight there is a presidential debate that I'm sure a lot of people are going to watch and be interested in, and maybe I'll be one of them. I don't know. But but even thinking about this election, and it seems like it's always described as the most important election ever, and if we don't get this right, our country is doomed. But regardless of whether that may be true or not, I tend to be suspicious. But regardless of who wins it, and I mean anybody who knows where I live and what my views are politically could guess like who I'm voting for. But that's not the point. Like the point is, whoever wins it, are we actually to think that it's God's appointed person, like that God appointed that they would win and wanted them there?
Yeah. I mean, you're right. So,
and I think the answer is yes, but I'm giving you a chance to.
I mean, I like everything you said. I think you led in, so obviously the answer is yes there. I kind of am going back to where you said I always want to doubt that this is the most important election of all time. I don't want to allow my heart to go there. The world is pretty old.
It's not that the issues aren't important are, and it's not that it's not to say that it's not an important election, and you should vote for the right person, but and I mean, not getting into that specifically of who Christians should vote for or maybe choose not to vote, whatever. Like, I understand there's views on all sides of that, but like just having the right perspective of no matter what happens here, God is actually the one ultimately on the throne and who ordains the leadership of our nation for our good, or maybe sometimes for our judgment. It's whatever his will is. And so we just pray for his will to be done on earth. And we do pray for righteous rule, righteous leadership. And I think he can actually, that God can accomplish righteous ends through imperfect means or through imperfect people, even in ways that we can't really calculate or understand. But anyway, I keep dominating the conversation.
No, I don't think you are at all. I think you're doing great. I'll just say for me, and I don't expect that everybody in our church feels exactly like I do, and it's okay. You don't have to. But if I had my choice, I wouldn't have put either one of these two people to be the top two candidates for president of the United States. And so no matter what happens, what I would have thought best is not going to be what God thinks best, right? Like, it's whatever happens, my wisdom is not going to be what wins the day. Now, that said, in this situation, there's two choices. So I do think of the two, there's a better choice. And so I'm not going to be like, well, if I don't get my way, I'm not playing the game at all. I'm not going in that direction. But whatever happens, it won't be a situation where I think, well, now the sun has risen on the world and everything's perfect. At the same time, I also think I'm going to do my best within the system I have and trust that whether we're led into years of famine or years of growth as a country, I believe in a God who's sovereign over all things. I read this morning, somebody had written, worry is doubt that God will do good. Bitterness is belief that God did not do good, right? And so I kind of want to give up worry and give up bitterness and say that, you know what, I think God's in control. That does not free me from responsibility to vote and to try to push toward the goods that I think are right based on whatever kind of wisdom God's given me. But at the same time, to keep my hand open and say, God's sovereign here and he's going to work it out. And he could work it out through hardship. I mean, he really could bring a famine on the land, and it's for our good if he does that. And so for the good of his kingdom, actually, I should say. It might not be, right? The empires have come and empires have gone, and I don't want the United States to be one that goes, but his kingdom is the kingdom that will last forever. And that's what matters here.
That's right, yeah. And that's the kingdom we're part of, and that's right. Is being built by God, no matter what the circumstances of our life may be or the life of our nation might be. God's kingdom is going to continue to advance, and that's the perspective that we need to have.
What I was trying to put here in this sermon is there's a decent chance, right? There is a fairly decent chance that we'll get a candidate that disappoints me, right? And I have a responsibility to act in a way that expresses disagreement honorably, right? And so I do think our country allows for protest and disagreement to say, no, we don't want this. But I also am disagreeing with a gift that God has given us, right? If it's not my choice. And so I have a responsibility to not be a worthless man by saying, no, this isn't the government that I would choose, and this isn't the direction that I think we should go. And yet, God has gifted us with not anarchy, right? Total anarchy would be worse than what we have. And so I don't want to push toward anarchy because I don't like the system that I have right now.
Yeah. And you'd be a worthless man.
I would be a worthless man if I did.
Sheba.
So
I'd call you Sheba.
That's right. But I would reinterpret that to be, he just means my good dog. That was my best friend right through it all.
That's good. Passage keeps going, and there's a somewhat enigmatic or strange passage having to do with the concubines. That,
let me mention something real quick about the strangeness of it before we talk about the actual concubines. You and I have talked about this before. There is, in my mind, a assumption of coherence. So let me explain what I mean by that. There are, I believe that this passage is meant to be read as if it was written by somebody that has a point and putting all this together. Not every scholar thinks that way. I do think the vast majority of ones who don't are loosely Christian, right? So especially what came out of Germany, it's called higher criticism, but these are skeptical people. They
would say it's multiple authors writing different pieces and just kind of putting them
That's
together.
Right. And so they see especially the Old Testament JEDP theory. Some of the people who took college skeptic Bible classes will remember there's different kinds of authors. Then some other author cuts and pastes them, glues them together, and you have things that could be contradictory. You have things that could be out of left field.
Yeah.
And there's no responsibility for you to ask, why would the author put this there, right? And there's no assumption that there is one guiding strategy in organization. So I don't take that. I take an assumption that says, no, this is intelligently written, and there will be markers. I do think that authors can change topics, right? So it's not wrong for me to think, he was talking about one thing in chapter 1 and a different thing in chapter 2, a different thing in chapter 3, but there's little markers that they can give us that say, hey, all of this stuff is related. And in this case, the fact that I start with Sheba and then later on he's going to come back to Sheba tells me that all of this conversation regarding Sheba, there's some sort of connection here. There can be a loose connection or a strong connection, but it invites me to ask those questions. So I do think these 10 concubines seem like they're coming out of left field, but that was part of my interpretive strategy, is to say, well, now, how does that fit in here? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So hopefully that helps.
So then, I'll just mention the specifics of the case, and then you can tell us how it does fit in. But David comes to Jerusalem. He takes the 10 concubines. These were the ones that he had left behind whenever he left Jerusalem. He had left them behind to kind of manage things, basically, in a way. And they were the ones that Absalom, not a pretty story at all, Absalom went into and slept with in the sight of all Jerusalem as a way of just dishonoring his father and kind of totally burning the bridge back to that relationship.
That's right.
And so these are those concubines, and obviously they have been kind of, they've been dishonored in a way. And so there's what David does is he shuts them up. He puts them under a guard. He takes care of everything that they need, which seems like a good thing. But at the same time, they're just being shut up. It says until the day of their death, and they lived as if they were widows. So they had everything taken care of, but they were just sort of, I don't know, quarantined, sectioned off, shut away, and that's what it says about them.
Yeah,
and then we move on to the next part of the story. So what is that there for?
Yeah.
Do you think?
So, well, first off, I mean, good on David for providing for them. But I think that the way this is written is not meant for us to walk away thinking good on David. Not necessarily bad on David either, in that he's done something evil. But this, you should read verse 3 and feel sad, right? The last line, they were shut up until the day of their death, living as if in widowhood, is meant to be like, that's not right. That's not good. And I think that this whole chapter is meant to make us think, that's not right, that's not good. There is a discordant note, and we'll get there, I know, again at the end. But this is the first sign that, David, your kingdom is crumbling here. You were so strong, and you had all these wives coming in. Shouldn't have had all these wives coming in, but you did as a symbol of your strength. And now that strength is starting to shrivel. You are old and broken, and you can't. Your wives are being locked up as if they're widows. It's like David himself. He's not dead yet, but it's from their perspective, it's like their husband has died. The David that we knew is gone, and I think that's the picture that's being painted.
Yeah, and it is very sad. And I think you made the point in the sermon that this is what sin does. This is what happens when you don't follow God's way of doing things and His will for sexuality and marriage and things like that. Like, the polygamy is not a good thing. Like, it damages the world, and it damages people and their lives. And so I thought about this when we were getting ready, and I'm kind of wanting to be careful in the way I say it, but you probably heard the saying before that God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, right?
Yep.
And that's usually kind of used as an insult. And I'm not saying it's ever probably a good idea to use that if you're in some kind of debate or conversation with somebody. But I do think that there's a real point that's behind it that's actually a good one, and that is that God did create in the beginning man and woman. He didn't create a man with a man. He created a man with a woman. A similar point that could be made with that, though, is that God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Eve and Mary and Susie and so on. Like, polygamy was not God's original design. He created one man with one woman. And when we go against that, it leads to all kinds of problems, not just personally, but societally. And I think that you're seeing a sad picture of that here in this passage with the concubines. You
just said it might not be a good thing to use in a conversation. I think it is good to use in the sense that it's very solid logic. It's not good to use in that it's become a joke for some people, and they'll likely reject it. Yeah. But the logic is simply, there is an order to this world, and it is an evident order. You should be able to look out and see design, and both in the way men and women are designed to go together, but also man and woman as opposed to man and women. And that's part of the design of God in this world. And I totally agree with you there.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's
I wonder if we should be less ashamed when they mock good logic simply because if you don't know how to respond to good logic, you mock it and you dismiss it by that.
Yeah.
But
I get it.
The world has systems all around it. This is something that is called natural law or natural revelation, that God has revealed Himself in chapter and verse of the Bible, and we can point to that with absolute certainty and say, look, this is what the Bible commands. But He's also revealed much of this just in the way the world is designed. And you can look out and see that men and women are designed to go together. And that suggests design, right?
Yeah.
And like,
absolutely.
I don't know. I'm not embarrassed. There was an old quote. I know that I'm making this go way too long, but you remember Ray Comfort? And he had he was an evangelist, street preacher,
Australian.
And he had this Australian. I love the guy, and he had this clip where he just said, you know why I'm not an atheist? Because of the banana. And he holds up a banana and he says, it's got these ridges and this perfect peeling system. And when I eat the banana, I get all the nutrients I need. And bananas, they just grow on trees. And he's just talking about the incredible nature of the banana. And he says, that's why I'm not an atheist. And like, obviously that's not the only reason he's not an atheist. But what he's saying is, I look at the world and I see that it's designed to sustain life. It's not like, hey, we've figured out some way to turn a rock into food. He says there's food that grows. I mean, it's made to sustain me and made to be consumed. And it's clear for him when he looks at a banana that it's not simply, it's like it has a protective sleeve to keep the fruit protected over top of the banana. And his point is just that the world seems designed, and that points into a designer. People mocked it and made fun of it online. And I remember hearing him say one day that he was embarrassed of how much mockery that got. And I've always felt like you shouldn't be embarrassed about that. It's an absolutely solid point that you made. And obviously you were putting a whole lot on a banana as a sort of trope there, but the point still stood. I see God's design and I should respond to it. Anyway,
right.
I'm tasting another.
I think
another
that is
rabbit.
good, and I think what may be happening for people sometimes when they make fun, and even Christians probably, some reacted negatively to what Ray Comfort said, and thinking that that's not a good argument or that's not going to convince atheists, But I think a lot of times that's what people are thinking, is that this won't convince, this won't be persuasive to somebody like an atheist or whatever. And I get that. It may not, but that doesn't make it less true. And
right.
if you are a Christian and you know that this is God's world, then absolutely you should look up at a banana and think, holy cow, this is an amazing thing that God has created. And it grows on trees like so many other forms of food does, and fruits and vegetables, and like these things just magically grow. And I mean, I use the word magically. I mean, you know what I mean, but it's like when you think about it, I know we've got all kinds of scientific categories to describe the processes that happen, but like those are just names we're putting on things. It's not that we actually understand the mystery of how these things work.
That's right.
And I'll go back to this G.K. Chesterton quote that I've made reference to multiple times before, but he said the reasons why fairy tales describe apples that are golden is to remind us of that wild moment when we realized that apples were green. It's just as magical and amazing that apples would be red or green or different colors than it is that apples would be golden. So, and just the fact of familiarity and that we're used to things being the way that they are kind of deaden us to the reality that they're actually amazing. And so be amazed at God's world. Yeah. How do we get into all that? I don't know. We're chasing some rabbits in this one, but I love them. And you're getting me close to chasing that chapter where that quote came from. I read it for the first time 2 weeks ago. And that whole chapter could be a fun conversation for us. It's basically, he says, I think we live in a fairy tale. And that's the chapter. How the implications of living in a fairy tale. But anyway, we'll save it. We'll get back to the sermon. So with that, we turn to this incident with Joab and Amasa. Joab being the former general of David's army, but David, like you've already mentioned, gave that job to Amasa as kind of a way of, bribing Judah in a sense to take him back, which we saw in the passage in the previous chapter. But anyway, you could already see there, like, I remember wondering to myself, like, what's Joab going to think of this? When David makes Amasa general in his stead. And we see that it's going to lead to conflict. And obviously Joab hates Amasa because there's a situation where David sends out Amasa to go and find Sheba, but then Amasa doesn't come back quick enough. And so David says to Abishai, go out with Joab's men, and y'all go get Sheba. So, but somewhere down the line, they meet up on the road somewhere, it seems, and Joab and Amasa have an exchange, which doesn't last long because Joab acts like he's gonna give Amasa a big old kiss, grabs a hold of his beard, but Joab plunges a sword into his guts, which then turns into this really ugly, gory scene with Amasa's blood and guts all over the road. And so what's kind of the takeaway there?
I mean, first off, it's just gross, right? But I see that obviously as Joab's decision that I'm not losing control of this army, right? I'm not losing my position. And the appointment of Amasa was a threat to him. What I try to emphasize here is that he did it all while claiming to be the loyal one, right? And when it was all done, everybody said, if you're loyal to David, you have to be loyal to Joab because Joab's loyal to David. And it's gross and everybody has this weird reaction and they don't know what to do. But eventually they decide he's the loyal one. And it's so hard for us to wrestle with because he is loyal to David in a sense.
Yeah.
And he has been in some really heroic ways. I mean, he's been just absolutely heroic at times. But here, claiming to be loyal is not the same thing as loyal, right? So what he's done is undercut the command of his king. He's disobeying his king, and it's actually a disloyalty that we're seeing, not a loyalty. It reminded me of Jesus. Many people will come and say, Lord, Lord, did we not do these things? And he says, if my followers are the people who keep my commandments. Yeah, I never knew you. My followers keep my commandments. And so he's not being loyal here. This isn't good.
I think that was a great point that you made in the message, that there's two kinds of rebellion, really. That one is an obvious sort of rebellion which is associated with Sheba. He's this guy who just says, I don't like the king. I don't want anything to do with David. I'm starting my own thing. Obvious kind of rebellion. Mm-hmm. But then number two, there's a less obvious kind, which looks like loyalty, looks like you are on the king's side. You wave the banner of the king, but you actually don't do what he says. And in reality, you just do what you want, which is what Joab is showing us. And I think that's a great point, because there's a lot of Christians who say they're committed to King Jesus, but when you look at the evidence of their life, like it doesn't actually bear itself out that way. And we're used to the phrase, Jesus is my Lord and Savior, but what does the word Lord actually mean? It means somebody that you are in submission to.
That's right.
It's somebody who is calling the shots in your life, and you do what they say. They are the boss. And so if you don't have Jesus as your Lord in a real sincere sense, like, you don't have him as your Savior, really.
That's it. That's right. Yeah, that's the problem with him. I do think Joab is this mixed bag, and it does remind me that we're all mixed bags to some degree. And later on, as we get into the ending of 2 Samuel, both Saul and David are bad, and they bring judgment on the country and because of their sins. But the difference is repentance, right? And so you can be a mixed bag. Not that you should want to be one, but the mark at the end of the day is, will I submit to the king? And when I fail to submit to the king, will I repent of it?
Yeah, that's right. Anything else on Joab and Amasa you want to touch on or move on?
No, I think maybe since we probably won't want to end here, I'll just say both here and the next stage, when he comes back to Jerusalem, David doesn't seem to respond to what happens, right? So The only response that I really can think of right now is that later in 1 Kings, when he's training his son Solomon about, okay, what are you going to do when you become king? He's going to say, you've got to get rid of Joab because, he's done some bad stuff. And I see that David's failure to respond. I don't know if he's scared of Joab. I don't know if he's just exhausted. But I see this as another sign of David knowing that he should have done something. Maybe he's just loyal to Joab because Joab's been loyal to him before. But it's a flat-out disobedience of your command and deserved a response, I think.
Yeah. Well, then it moves on to the city of Abel, which they find, which Sheba is kind of hiding out in, and they come, Joab and his army, they come and are going to take the city as a way to take Sheba. Really, right. That's their whole goal. They just want Sheba, but they kind of besiege this whole city. And there's a woman who comes out and says, "Look, we're good guys. We're good people. We are a city that's known for its wisdom and giving good advice and counsel." She said, "There's a saying about this city that people always come to it for good advice and things to that effect." She says, she's just like, "Don't do this to us. We'll let you have Sheba, but don't do this to us." And so they get Sheba that way. Or how does it actually play out there?
Yeah. At the end, after the conversation, she goes inside and she talks to the other guys, and they cut off his head and throw it over the wall.
Okay, yeah. So they just
Dorothy actually, on the way home, Dorothy showed me that she drew a picture during church of a woman cutting off a man's head and throwing it over the wall.
That's the kind of children's, coloring picture we need.
That's right.
To go along with sermons
Great
like
content.
This. They will never forget it.
I'll do a little dad brag thing. Dorothy, this story seemed to stick in Dorothy's mind. So last night, Dorothy's listening at bedtime right now to a story Bible, and it's on Audible, and it just plays, and she listens until she falls asleep. And it's in the story of Joseph. And so it's when Joseph is bragging to his brothers about, hey, I had this dream, and I'm going to be awesome. And so when I go in to tuck her in and say goodnight, she says, "Dad, is that good that he does this?" And I said, "Well, do you think it's wise?" And then I asked her, "Wait, what does wise mean?" And she said, and I was so proud of her. She said, "Well, sometimes wise just means that you're able to get what you want, like the woman today. But sometimes wise means you do the right thing and you know how to please God. So I want to know, is he doing the right thing?" And I was like, that it was really cool to me that she in some way was connecting wisdom to this woman. And I don't know, I guess it struck me because here's Dorothy drawing pictures in the middle of church of a woman cutting somebody's head off and throwing it over the wall. But she's also, somehow this story's in her brain, and she's comparing it to other stories in the Bible. And just, I hope that if you have kids,
nuance different senses of the same word.
Yeah, well, that was pretty impressive. Dorothy's pretty bright. But I do hope that if you have kids in church and they're drawing and coloring, you won't think, what a waste. They're just drawing and coloring. Like, I do think they're listening more, but encourage them to draw and color pictures of people cutting people's heads off and things like that. That's worth it. Anyway, I just say that as a parent who sometimes thinks, what are my kids getting out of this? Yeah. Maybe more than you realize.
Yeah, for sure. And even more, though, I think they'll get out of it if parents make an intentional effort to kind of go over things and reinforce things in their own time. So just keep that in mind. You've really got a big role to play in the shepherding and discipling of your children.
Yeah.
Just the way God set it up.
That's right.
After that whole episode, there is an epilogue, which is just kind of a closing statement about different people that were in leadership at this time.
Right.
And so some of the people that are mentioned is Joab, Benaiah, Adoram, Jehoshaphat, Shiva. You don't have to remember all these names necessarily, but these are all people who had different roles in the kingdom now at this point. And you made a point that it's almost the same list as what we've seen earlier in, I believe it was 2 Samuel 8, you said?
Right.
And I didn't go back and look at it and compare myself, but I'll take your word for it that it's virtually the same list. But one important difference between the two is that David is missing from this one.
That's right.
What's kind of the point you take from that?
So there were a couple other small variations there. I don't want to act like that's the only difference, but the huge variation is an opening line about David's reign. David reigned over all of Israel, and he ruled with justice and equity. And I remember it when we did 2 Samuel 8, we talked about justice and equity and what that meant and how having a king was this great thing. And now the end talks about the people who ruled David's kingdom without reference to David, right? So it's like, and so I'll say this, that it's a little bit unique, and I don't think the fact that it's unique proves everything, but it's unique that David has two summaries. Most kings get one summary at the beginning, kind of like what we've already had. But David's a unique king. His story's long, and so maybe you get two summaries because of that. But the second summary and its difference, and the fact that it's coming right after Joab's two little rebellions here, all seem to point to the fact that David is losing control, and that now Joab is in command, and David's kingdom is being run by people other than David. And it is, several commentaries, but I was convinced that it's very, very significant that David doesn't show up in here except for at the very end. Well, he was David's priest, but it's not that David is reigning. He's not leading this thing. And so it's meant to be read with a level of sadness that the kingdom isn't like it used to be. It's not the king who's at the top and he's reigning over his people with justice and equity.
Yeah.
The king has faded.
Yep.
His people have taken over his rule, and he has become...
He's now a puppet of the deep state, right?
Amen. I love it. I love it.
Sorry, got into political mode there. Current events.
I really like that one, though. But it is. I mean, I do think he is that, and I think it's meant to make us sad. It's meant to make us think. So, especially because this whole book is written to be like, when you get your king, it's going to be great and just and good. And now the people are... It's relevant to me that this whole book is written after there's no king in Israel. Right? So they're deported. The king in Israel and Judah are gone. And it's written to a people who have lost their king. And what is it asking them to believe? Like, why write this to a deported people? Hey, the good old days? Like, that's not the point of this. It's to say the good old days, in a sense, weren't the good old days. People believed that if they could just get here or they could just do that, it would all get fixed. And so I think it goes to David's reign, and it does say that, through the king, we've seen justice and equity and growth and strength. And so there is something to the king, but David's reign himself was, I read from Ecclesiastes chapter 1, vanity, everything's vanity. Yeah. It comes and it goes and it didn't last. And at the end of David's reign, it's not like it was in the beginning. And don't look for a Band-Aid to fix the current issue. What is the true hope of Israel? Yeah. I kind of almost went to Hebrews. I know the women are getting ready to start a study in Hebrews, but how much you've taught through Hebrews. I mean, doesn't this remind you of, hey, they entered the rest, but they didn't really enter the rest when they got into the promised land? That kind of picture seems to be being painted for me right here. Yeah. And I agree. And that is where you gave us a piano lesson in the message. That's right. So that brought you to your conclusion, though, which is to ask,
what is the point here? Why so much death and discouragement going on here in this passage? And the way you put it, I think, was that the point of the passage is encouragement through discouragement. Yeah. So we're discouraged by seeing that what is supposed to be God's kingdom is like in disarray and is just a gross mess in a lot of ways. And we know that's not right. We know that's not the way it's supposed to be. But what that does is draw our minds to the way it's supposed to be and to the way it will be in the fullness of time through Jesus Christ. And so that's where our hope is. That's where our eyes should be fixed. And even reading this Old Testament passage in retrospect, kind of in a literary sense, it is drawing our minds to the New Testament, to the fullness of what Christ did and how he is the one ultimately who is the son of David that will come and usher in God's kingdom in the way it's supposed to be. And so that's the encouragement we get from it. And so talk me through one more time the scale and
the music,
and how you illustrated that.
I kept my eyes on Jack Warren as I was doing that to make sure that I didn't get the music stuff wrong. But he smiled, so I think that I was at least on the ball, at least on the right track there. In a scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So go watch Sound of Music, and you'll remember that song. Basically, all music is built on these scales, and a scale is a kind of a progression. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You can play around. You can do all these different things in a song. But the way I know what the do note is kind of the home. It starts there and it ends there. The way I know that, and it doesn't even have to start there all the time. You can start a song that's not on the do note, but it can't end until you get back to the sense of home.
It resolves that way.
Yeah, it's got to resolve. And so I did that analogy where I went do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and then I just stopped right there at the T. I'm like, don't you feel like you need do?
Right, yeah.
Don't I have to go back there? And I did the piano because I know I can't even sing it right, so I might have resolved by accident. But with the piano, I'm hoping that you can hear that lack of it being finished sound, and you're like, I need it to go one more step, and and I think that people who know music theory know the language there that it has to resolve, and I think I used the word tonic. That's kind of a music theory word, but you don't have to know music theory to know that I need it to go one more note. I need it's not quite done here, and I think that that's the emotion that this book is creating in us, not through music, but through the sense of this can't be where it ends.
Right. And that's good. And even thinking about from one do to the other do, like I don't know if you made this point or if it was just in my head, but you can almost think of like the promise given to David as the original do, the original way, kind of sort of the ideal, the way it's supposed to be. But then it goes through this whole progression leading up to probably that last chord, the T. And I don't know exactly what notes you played there, but there's something very discordant. I don't know if discordant's the right word, but that's the funkiest sounding chord of them all. And before you get to that last do, but it's one do to the next. There's the ideal of God's promise leading up to the fulfillment in Christ, and back to the way it's supposed to be. The one who accomplishes that is Jesus. And so I just think that's such a cool way to think about this. So I really appreciate it. I thought you did really well with it, and a lot of people enjoyed it.
So I took it there. Thank you. I appreciate that. I took it there to Christmas, right? So you ended by playing a Christmas song with us, and I thought about it and asked you to do the Christmas song. And then as I thought about it more and more, my mind just kept running on Christmas.
I like what you said about it. You said there's an irony.
There's an irony in Christmas. And so, like, one of the things that I started hearing as a pastor when I first started pastoring, I'm sure you have too, is be careful around Christmas time, because for some people, Christmas is super happy. It's family and everything's great. But there's a lot of people who on Christmas are going to feel this isn't right.
Yeah.
It's going to feel like a super sad note on Christmas because there's somebody that should be there that's not there.
Right.
And, you know, as a kid, I don't think I ever once thought about that. Right? There was never a time as a kid that I realized this is discordant, this isn't right.
Yeah. I just wanted to know what N64 game I was going to get.
That's right. For me, it was original Nintendo game. I wanted Excite Bike or
different
Duck Hunt
generation.
or something. But right, it's the as you get older, I think the older you get, the more people you know that there'll be some happiness at Christmas, but there'll be some tears shed at Christmas too.
Right. Yeah.
And there could be in our minds this sense of just try not to bring it up, try to get it out of your head. Don't lay too heavy on the Christmas because that's so sad for people. And I think now what this is telling me is actually that's when you need come thou long expected Jesus the most, is to say, that's right. This discordant note is an important part of singing come back Jesus. Right. And so, you know, and especially old Christmas traditions, we lose it with the marketing of Christmas, but old Christmas traditions, they call it the advent of Christ, and it looks forward to the second advent, the second coming of Christ. And that was a huge part of the way they did worship. They're like the Anglican Church, for instance, Kara was talking to me about, they'll have Christmas sermons that are kind of planned out for them in a 4-year rotation. And usually Christmas sermons are on the second coming. Right, so not the birth of Jesus; they're on the second coming of Jesus. Now it's a rotation, so it's not always that way, and that's not unique to Anglicanism. It was that Jesus came, and we know He's coming back, and I feel like that is the point here at the end. Is we saw a hint of what the King could be, we saw a hint of the justice and equity of David's kingdom, and it's shown, and then it diminished, but it's diminishing for you to recognize it's coming back. Your sermon last week was the return of the King. And I think that the end of this is there is a return of the King, but it's not the return of David. It's the return of the son of David. And that's the part that I think is so exciting.
Yeah, it was powerful. It was a great way to conclude the message, and it stuck with me. And I just thought it was very, very well done.
Thanks, man.
Anything else to mention in closing?
I don't know if this is a big deal for people now, but I'm going to try to share the Bible Project. If you remember a Bible Project, they kind of like draw out the outline of the book and then kind of walk through a summary of it. We've done 1st and 2nd Samuel, and we're nearing the end of it. What's left for us is actually, I'm not sure how the preaching of it's going to work, because the conclusion is 4 chapters, 21, 22, 23, and 24. 21 and 24 are these 2 stories about famine in the land, but the first is a famine caused by Saul, and the second is a famine caused by David, and they're separated in the middle by these songs that David wrote, and we're reflecting on that, and all of this is a reflection of these 2 books. Part of the way we're going to interpret 22 is going to be made clear when we get to 24. We're just going to do our best to work through it linearly. I don't know a better way to do it in a sermon. But to recognize that where we're at now going forward is not a continuation of the story of David, but going back in time to look at things that happened in the life of David and of Saul, and to say, how does that provide an interpretive framework for everything we've already seen? But I'll go ahead and spoil it all. The difference between David and Saul at the very end of the day is humility. And we've seen it so many times. God provides for his people through his king. But a good king is a meek king, is a humble king. He's a king that sins, but he's a king that repents. And then when we get to Christ, the great king, he's not a king that sins, but he is a king who in his meekness puts the sins of others on his back. And that's his sign of meekness. So that's where we're going. I just say that to prepare everybody for a structure that's a little bit funny, it's a little bit different, but to help you if you want to kind of prep yourself for it, we'll try to put on the Facebook page the Bible Project summary of the 2 books, because it's the same structure we followed as we've gone through it. And if you're not on Facebook, but somehow you're listening to this on YouTube or the app, you can just type in Bible Project 2 Samuel, and you can find it on YouTube.
Some great visual overviews and depictions of the stories of the Bible. Yeah, for sure.
All right, that's all I got.
That's it.
I think I'm up next week. Are you up the week after that? It was a short break, wasn't it?
I think I'm on the 29th, so you got a couple more weeks.
Okay.
And then I'll be on the 29th, and eventually we're going to start talking about when our first week in the new building will be.
I know. I don't know, even though there's only 4 chapters left, we might spend more time in one of David's Psalms. It's pretty good, so we'll see how long that takes us. But it's like, there's just a lot there.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we'll have at least 4 more weeks, but probably more like 5 or 6 more weeks in 2 Samuel. Hopefully we'll be in the new building before this series is done. And after that, I'm not sure what's next, but we've got a couple things that have been floated around. And I'm excited about it. Won't be long before we're doing Christmas again.
That's right.
I'll tell you, Caitlin Beasley told me she will never complain about Christmas carols, that she wants us to do more of them, even if it's in September.
Yeah, I agree. It's good stuff.
All right.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Have fun watching the debate tonight if you do. And don't forget to laugh a little bit, because you know that Jesus is still king no matter what.
That's right. He holds them all in derision. That's right.
Amen.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.